Today we are delighted to have Joao, who is from Portugal, and he has an extensive background as a medical oncologist. He has worked in the pharmaceutical industry for nearly a decade while navigating the journey to fatherhood. Joao will share his experiences on balancing professional and personal life, the challenges of parental leave, and the unique dynamics of shared parenting. Stay tuned for an insightful conversation. Hello, everyone. Today we have Joao with us in our podcast, and I really thank you for participating. Could you please share a bit about your background to our audience and, yeah, what do you do, and also your journey into fatherhood?
Thank you. So first of all, let me thank you for the kind invitation. It's really a pleasure for me to be participating in your podcast and sharing something that is important to me and close to my heart. Um, I come from Portugal. I was born in Lisbon and grew up just south of Lisbon. I trained as a medical doctor. I specialized as a medical oncologist. And soon after I specialized, I transitioned to a career in the pharmaceutical industry. And that's essentially what I have been doing pretty much full time for the last 10 years almost. So I started working for one of the big pharmaceutical multinationals in the Portuguese affiliate. So I worked from Portugal for 4.5 years, and now for almost 5 years, I've been working for the same multinational company, but for the global organization. Um, and so it's been interesting 10 years in which I've done different roles and lived in different countries. But it's also a parallel journey to my journey into parenthood because when I was a father for the first time, I was already working in the pharmaceutical industry, and as we're probably going to discuss, that allowed me to have some more flexibility to work with my wife towards raising our children in their early years. So I am married to my beautiful wife, who is a psychiatrist, um, and we have two kids. Clara is has just turned 6, and she started primary school just a couple of weeks back. And we have a son, Manuel, who will turn 3 in December and just started kindergarten this year.
Cool. And so going forward to your parenthood journey, you said that you had more flexibility to stay at home and watch your kids. Was that the same thing for both of your kids? They have 3 years difference, right?
Yeah, 3.5 years difference. The experience was very different, and that's why it's interesting because it is really related to where I was in my professional life in the two different moments where when we had our kids. So it took us a while to get pregnant as a couple from our daughter. Um, but when it finally happened and Maria Clara was born, um, so we needed to decide how to organize ourselves as a family because we live in Lisbon. My parents don't live that far away, but they're older, and so they we knew they wouldn't be able to support us um, a lot. And although my wife's parents are very supportive and they help us a lot, they do live very far away from Lisbon. So we knew we needed to organize, um, especially in those first months after a kid is born. You know how that is. Um, and so the circumstances were that the our first pregnancy was quite difficult on my wife, and for different reasons. She needed to stay at home um, by medical recommendation for most of the pregnancy. And really, when the time came to deliver the baby and start this new phase in our lives as a family, we realized that my wife couldn't really afford to stay away from work for much longer. Um, the reason being, she was working then at the university hospital and teaching in the university as well. But in parallel, and this is something that is very common in a country like Portugal, physicians do need to work in the private sector as well to complement their salaries. And it's really hard when you work in the private sector because you have your patients and you have your employer. It's really hard to be away for a very long time. And so we realized that because she was away for a very long time, um, she couldn't just take the full maternity leave as one would expect a mother to do. And so we benefited from the fact that I had a little bit more flexibility in my work to swap the traditional roles when it comes to parenting leave. Um, it was okay for me and for my employer to stay at home for a longer period of time, and this was also a good fit to my wife's needs to go back to work earlier. So what we decided to do was to take what in Portugal is called a shared parental leave. And when you take a shared parental leave, essentially you can decide on how long you're going to stay in parental leave and share that period between the mother and the father according to one's needs and the arrangements that can be done. And so we stayed at home to collectively for approximately 8.5 months, something like that, which was great for my daughter, I guess. Out of those 8.5 months, we did spend some time together because that's also part of the Portuguese laws and regulations that there's a pre-specified amount of time that both the mother and the father need to stay with the kids. So we did stay some time together in the beginning, and then overall, I I don't remember exactly, but I think I was a stay-at-home dad for approximately 7 months, and my wife took another month or month and a half with the baby. So this wasn't something that was very common at that point in time in Portugal. Most of our friends and colleagues do it in a more traditional way,
Yeah.
and typically the mother is the stay-at-home parent. Um, but to be honest, there were very practical and pragmatic reasons why we needed to do things this way, and we were also very fortunate that the Portuguese laws and regulations allowed us to shape our parental leave to our needs very well. So we're very grateful for that. When Manuel was born, we were in a completely different situation as a family because when Manuel was born, I had joined the global organization little over 2 years before. So I was actually working in Switzerland, and I was commuting back and forth between Switzerland and Portugal. We need to keep in mind that this was during the pandemic, so I wasn't commuting that much at that point in time, specifically because we were all at home. But I did have my employment and my contract in Switzerland. And the Swiss laws are very different from the Portuguese laws and regulations. And so we needed to find a way to make the laws and regulations in Switzerland compatible to the laws and regulations in Portugal and also to our needs as a family. So it was very different and maybe a little bit more complicated and not as generous, I would say, as it was for our first daughter. So overall, I managed to take 4 months of parental leave, um, and so we and my wife took some time as well, but she was pretty much in the same situation as for our first kid because for different reasons she had to spend most of her pregnancy at home. Again, it was a very complicated pregnancy with a lot of bumps in the road. And so she was, on the one hand, very eager to stay at home. On the other hand, she couldn't afford to stay at home for very long. So she took as much time as she could. And I took all the time I could, as allowed by the Swiss regulations and my company's policies. And so I stayed at home for approximately 4 months. I also took all the holidays I could. So I had saved some days so that we could maximize our time together as parents with the baby, while at the same time allowing my wife to go back to doing some work as soon as she could, because she couldn't really afford to stay out for 3 or 4 months. So very different experiences, highly shaped by where we were as a family and professionally in our lives, and in this particular case, also shaped by different laws and regulations that existed in the two countries that were relevant for our family in these two different processes.
Yeah. Great. I have a lot of questions coming up, but so going back, I just one question about Portugal. How long is the parental leave usually?
So I don't know exactly, but if I remember correctly, and I can double check afterwards, and you can add it to the description in your podcast and all of that. But if I remember correctly, so there's a minimum amount of time that you are allowed to take. You don't have to take it, but there's a minimum. So if you apply for parental leave, there's a minimum. I think it's 3 months.
Okay.
That's the minimum. Mandatory is 6 weeks for the mother and I think 2 weeks for the father. That's
Okay.
mandatory. So if you apply for a parental leave, you get a minimum of 3 months. If you applied for what in Portugal is called shared parental leave, which means that it is shared not necessarily equally, but between the mother and the father, you get an additional month. And this is
Okay.
paid 100%. So essentially, whoever is on parental leave receives 100% of the salary paid by the Portuguese government. And additional to that, you don't pay taxes for that period. So it's very generous. It is limited in time. So what you can do in Portugal is you can extend your parental leave from these 4 months to, I believe it's up to 1 year. So you can stay up to 1 year. The nuance here is the longer you stay in parental leave, the less the government is going to pay
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
proportion to your salary.
Yeah.
Um, so if I remember correctly, so if you stay between those 4 months and I think 9 months, they would pay something like, no, it's 4 months and 6 months, they would pay something like 85% of your salary, between 6 and 9, roughly two-thirds of the salary, and between 9 and 12, it's they don't pay you. So you can stay on leave, but you don't get a salary paid by the Portuguese government.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that seems. I mean, that seems fair if I compare it to other countries. And when you say to swap parental leave, does it mean that you have equal months together, or it's more like you separate the whole period of time between the mom and the dad?
Not necessarily equal. So you can. So it is very flexible. It is very flexible. So within the amount of time that you apply for, you can split that amount of time in any way between the father and the mother, between the
Mm-hmm.
two parents. Well, or
Okay.
between the two parents. It doesn't have to be a father and a mother.
Yeah.
So you can split it very flexibly. It's not very easy to because you need to articulate and coordinate with the social security. So the more complicated you make your plans, the more difficult it is to coordinate with social security. um, and there's, for example, in Portugal, you can do most of this online if it's a very simple setup that you're applying for. If it's a complicated setup, for example, the father takes 2 weeks here and the mother takes the following 8 weeks and the father takes 4 weeks. I mean, if you're gonna ask the Social Security to authorize you to have a very difficult setup,
Yeah.
it's not easy to do this online. But in our case, we didn't make their lives very easy because we did need to. I needed to work for a couple of weeks here and there because of projects I was leading, and I couldn't really be away. And they were very helpful and very flexible. You just need to go to the Social Security offices, and they help you. And so it is very flexible. The more complicated you want it to be, the more difficult it is. But our plans were not easy ones, and it all worked out because they were very flexible and helpful. You can also change your mind along the way. So whatever parental leave you apply for, you can always get in touch with the Social Security and ask for any changes. And we actually did that because um, towards the end of our parental leave, my wife decided that she wanted to take some time off, and because that sense of urgency of going back to work quickly was already gone, and she was a little bit more relaxed about that, and so she wanted to take some time off with the baby, and so we asked the Social Security, can we stay an extra? I don't know if it was 4 or 6 weeks, and they allowed us to do so.
Okay. That's great. You guys, I think, are presenting the importance of parental leave policies around the world because it's so different everywhere else. And I'd say I see, like in Bulgaria, we have a lot of good parental leave for mothers. We have like up to 1 year is paid, and then you have 2 years where the second year, I think, is just less percentage of the payment, but that's have only 2 weeks. So I think it presents also the traditional families that we're portraying as Balkan people. I mean, like moms are the main caregivers where dads are not, and I can see that from my like other generation of families and my grandparents. But coming from your side in Portugal, it's more like initially like parents are both caregivers and they have to take care of the kids both together. And on another note, it sounds like a really complex strategy to have both of your workflows and everything together to work together as a couple, which I found fascinating. And I wanted to ask, after the first pregnancy, did your relationship changed a bit? Probably yes, but how in a way?
Are
Having a
you
child.
kidding me? Yeah, it completely changed. I mean, not because of how we decided to set up our parental leave, but
Yeah.
because becoming a parent
Yeah.
is probably, if I look back, it's probably the most impactful, life-changing event in that I have experienced. Maybe the only the only other life event that became close to being a parent for the first time was actually becoming a parent for the second time. Becoming a parent for the second time, I can tell you, it does add another layer of complexity. But jokes aside, going back to your question, um, it so I do feel it, the way we managed together our parental leave and the way we became parents together strengthened our relationship very much. Um, Having said that, these are very, very stressful moments. So it's not without challenges. It's not without bumps in the road. It's not without moments of disagreement and very high stress, feelings of guilt, for example. So I do agree with you 100% that the way the Portuguese laws and regulations are built um, do allow the families a lot of latitude and do allow did allow us as a family to live parenthood according to our values and our feelings of purpose and the way we identify as parents. So it was we're really grateful for having had that opportunity, and we completely understand it's really not the case in a lot of countries um, in which it is expected that the mother takes on that role. That didn't work for us professionally. That did not align with our values as a couple. So we really, the way we always, um, the way we've always seen parenthood and experienced lived parenthood was very different from that preconceived societal notion that mothers take care of the kids and parents work. Um, in fact, we challenged those assumptions by doing things completely in a different, opposite way.
Yeah. And following that, during those 7 months where you were a stay-at-home dad, so you were the go-to parent, did you faced any challenges or misconceptions by people, friends? I don't know, any type of misconceptions from society.
I think society is very kind to men, and that is also an expression of how these pre preconceptions and misconceptions are construed. Um, I think it's very when the man takes on the responsibility to be a stay-at-home dad, the man immediately becomes a hero. It's like, oh my god, that's so cool. um, Whereas if the mother takes on that role, nobody will congratulate her or say she's a hero, and that to me is very unfair. On the other hand, um, when the mother, for some reason, needs to go back to work, um, there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of criticism that is completely unfair, even if it's very subliminal. So my experience during those 7 months was I got a lot of positive comments, and a lot of I feel I inspired a lot of people, but I don't think this is very benign as a feeling, to be honest, because I definitely don't feel like a hero. I definitely feel it's wrong to portray a man that decides to stay at home for 7 months for completely practical reasons as a hero, and particularly by doing that, you're actually in a very subliminal way punishing the mothers that actually decided to go back to work or wanted to go back to work. So I wish we were at a different place as a society, in which the man is no more a hero if he stays at home with with her kid, um, and a woman is not a villain because she decides to go back to work, and everything is naturally accepted. And um, yeah, I wish we were at that place as a society. So to answer your question straight, I didn't get criticism, but you you do sense that because we did things in a slightly different way, that challenged some preconceptions that exist in society, and you feel that, and that creates For example, that I know for a fact that in my wife, at some points in time, that created some feelings of guilt.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just about to ask that because I think it's the normal way of happening. Like it's normal a person will feel guilt when people are saying praising guys that are at home, stay at home, and they're going to the park with their kids, and people are looking at them differently than just a mom walking around with her kid as well.
They're the heroes. I mean, fathers are the heroes, and mothers are just being mothers,
Yeah, yeah,
and that is completely unfair. And I mean, there's no point. I mean, there's no. If you think about it for 5 minutes, there's absolutely no reason for that because parents are parents, um, and we should have complementary and equally important roles in when it comes to everything from raising children to taking care of the household. I don't criticize families that do it in a traditional way at all, at all. I think whatever works for families for practical reasons and whatever works and aligns with values and beliefs, it's absolutely fine. But we should be mindful not to criticize one shape of arrangement versus another just because it's the traditional way or the normal way of doing things. I hate normal word in this context, by the way.
and do you have any other friends, dads that were stay-at-home dads or like the go-to parent?
Well, I do have friends who, because they have more of a flexible professional life, they tend to take on that role. But when it comes specifically to parental leave and their experience with parental leave, I don't think I know of someone who's of any couple that has done the same we did. Because I mean, I don't like to put it as if I did something. I didn't do anything. We did things as a couple in a certain way because
You had
for
to.
many reasons, it suited our needs, our expectations, and what we needed to do.
Yeah. I was just curious because there is the other side of you where dads has shared with me that from the corporate side, for instance, if you're a stay-at-home dad, they would not look to you in a good way because you say, "I'm going to go in do my parental leave or take my time off because I need to take care of the kids." So there's this both sides of the coin where dads are the breadwinners. So if they are stay at home, there is another stigma that you can actually experience. So I was just curious if you've ever seen that or people have talked about it.
So again, because I had two very different experiences, um, and it's the same company, so it has to do with local laws and regulations and also the culture, right? Um, when my daughter was born and I took my parental leave in Portugal, I mean, I my company could not have been more generous or more understanding. I mean, it couldn't. Um, of course, my company needs to abide by local laws and regulations. That is non-negotiable. But I never, but I mean ever, felt any hint of criticism or challenge or at all. My company was super supportive. My line manager was super supportive. My team got together to make sure that I could really be off and didn't have to worry about anything about my job. Actually, so my company actually hired someone to cover me during my parental leave. That person ended up staying in the company because she did a fantastic job. But so I was my company did everything that they could to assure me that I would be covered, that I didn't need to worry about about my work, that I didn't need to worry about my job. I got extraordinary performance reviews because when my daughter was born, so my parental leave spanned essentially between 2018 and 2019. So for those 2 years, I was off for a period of time, and I was still, I would say, recognized by my employer as a valuable professional and a valuable worker, irrespective of the fact that I spent some time off on parental leave. So I can only be grateful, and I can only praise my organization for how they did things. When Manuel was born, I would say the company's attitude was the same completely. So they actually in Switzerland, um, there's a mandatory parental leave for fathers, mandatory by law, which is very limited. If I remember correctly, that's 2 or 3 weeks. So it's essentially up to the organizations, up to the companies to offer fathers more time. Whereas for mothers, for example, it's a minimum of 16 weeks, and the company can extend it if they want to offer that benefit to. So the law in Switzerland really protects mothers or punishes mothers, depending on how you want to look at it, and punishes fathers or protects them, again, depending on your perspective. In my organization, it's not completely equal, but it's almost the same for mothers and fathers, or for both parents. Let's put it this way. So the company was very generous. Of course, the company was not as generous as the Portuguese government, but we're talking about two different sets of regulations, and so it's really not a comparable reality. What I felt when Manuel was born, what was different in my perspective was the fact that I was working in a different context. I was working for the global organization, and the volume of work that is expected, and the speed of work, and it was a lot more stressful, both for me and my line manager and the team, to manage my absence. So it wasn't because the company acted differently. It was more because of the nature of my work, and the nature of the team's setup. It was a lot harder. But my line manager was very she understanding, and she did everything she could to spare me from having to do any work, and she tried to organize the team in such a way that I could really be off. But I'm not going to say I didn't go to my emails every now and then, because it's a lot harder because of the nature of the work, and the volume, and the intensity, and the speed, the pace of the work.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say it's so valuable to have like a good employer that realizes the importance of being a parent, because there are different stories everywhere. So it's more like some people are privileged and some people are not. um,
Absolutely. And I mean, I want to make clear that if anyone listening to the podcast is planning to come to Portugal and be a parent in Portugal, I mean, the local laws and regulations are very generous, and they have just been improved a couple of weeks ago. So now the amount of time that is paid 100% has been extended to, I think, 180 days, which is 6 months. So the laws and regulations are generous, but the company's attitudes are not all the same.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
I've been very, very, very fortunate, and I am very, very grateful for how my employer treated me during this period of my life.
Hmm. And so now a bit of a different question, but going back to those 7 months, I'm curious to ask you, what is the main obstacle or challenge that you've experienced when you were for the first time or first couple of moments alone with your kid?
Well, as you and probably all your listeners know, kids do not come with an instructions manual. So it is very difficult, especially if you, like me, didn't grow up around siblings. So I'm an only child, so I didn't have a lot of references. I didn't really know what to do, and the first few times I was alone with this baby, this thing in front of me, it was really difficult. But I think biology gives you a lot of tools to manage that. Trust me, it's all in our DNA. So even if you don't know how to do things, you learn quickly. Um, what was probably the most difficult thing for me was how exhausted I was after a full day. I mean, we had a nanny who came most days during a part of the day, so that could give me a little bit of breathing space sometimes. If for some reason the nanny didn't come, or my wife was doing a night shift or something, that experience of being alone with the baby for 24 hours, for me was extremely difficult because of how exhausting it became after a few hours. Um, it's so it's not difficult. Technically, it's not difficult because I mean it's a baby. You kind of learn how to hold it. You kind of learn how to feed it. You learn how to bathe it. You know how to change diapers and all of that. And it's a very repetitive routine, especially with very small babies, right? Because they eat, they burp, uh, they do their physiological things in the diaper. They sleep, and essentially, if you're lucky, you have a few minutes during their sleep to unwind and breathe before it all starts again 2 hours later. So it's very repetitive. Assuming the kid is well, of course, if the kid is sick, is a different story. But it's very repetitive. It's not technically difficult, but it's exhausting because you don't get a lot of breathing space. Maybe some people manage that better than others. For me, that was probably the most difficult thing I had to manage.
Yeah, I think sleep deprivation and low sleep quality is one of the biggest issues also for parental mental health issues. So basically, what you guys did, the strategy of sharing this exhaustion is perfect, because I think that's why moms, like the majority of mothers, are experiencing a lot of mental health issues after becoming a mom, because they don't sleep and they're the only ones that are staying at home for a long time, experiencing this exhaustion. But another question: did your wife breastfeed?
For my daughter, she breastfed for a very brief period. Um, and so it didn't really work for us. It didn't really work for my wife. It didn't really work for the baby. And at some point in time, we decided to move to bottle. And I mean, of course, that makes things a lot easier when it comes to sharing the actual workload. But the thing with my daughter is we had enough exhaustion to share because she was such a poor sleeper during the nights, that even with um, sharing tasks, and so what we usually did with my daughter was, um, we took turns, and we took shifts essentially, uh, because that allows you at least like a few hours of
Yeah.
uninterrupted sleep. But my daughter used to wake up so frequently, and it was so difficult to put her back to sleep, that both of us were dead the next morning every single day. So it was hard. With my son, it was a lot less difficult. I wouldn't say easier because it wasn't easy, but it was a lot less difficult.
Hmm. Okay. Thank you. So I have one last questions before because our time is moving faster. So if you have one or two things that you can say to a soon-to-be parent, what would it be when it comes to what you've expected and what was the reality?
That's a great question. In my personal experience, um, it was difficult to have very concrete and well shaped expectations. Um, so I think my biggest difficulty before we actually had our daughter was that I didn't really know what to expect. What I knew or what I anticipated is it would be hard and tough, but I didn't know exactly how. So that this uncertainty can be very difficult. So this is and the one thing I learned, especially after having been a parent twice, is that even when you do have expectations, and for our son, when our son was born, we did have some expectations because we had a reference, right?
Yeah.
We um, that uncertainty is, I mean, you should still embrace that uncertainty. The reason being, kids can be very different
Yeah.
from each other. So we have to, they have been super different in their first 2 years. Um, and yeah, I think you can. So I don't want to, I typically try to avoid scaring people off parenthood. I think that's completely wrong. Parenthood is by far the best thing in my life. It has also been probably one of the most difficult things I've done in my life. But if you put things in a balance, I mean, the positives really, really, really outweigh the negatives. So I would say don't listen too much to what your aunts or your grandparents say. Don't learn too much from the examples of people around you, especially before your kid is born, because when the kid is born, it's always going to be a discovery process. And you're going to have to learn how to manage that little creature. Um, and no two little creatures are created equal. So it's always going to be a very rich, diversified experience. So be ready, get your sleep before you become a parent, try to be in the best possible shape. Once your baby is born, be kind to yourself, accept that you don't know everything, accept that it's not gonna be easy all the time, and that it's not going to be perfect. I think being kind to yourself, allowing yourself to fail and not to be perfect, I think is very important for someone who is going to become a parent.
Thank you so much, Joel. That was amazing. I think it was a great conversation. So thank you so much for sharing everything that you've shared.
This was my pleasure. I really appreciate. Again, thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure to spend the last 45 minutes talking to you. I hope um, sharing this experience will be of value for your listeners. If you want to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to share anything else and answer any questions that your listeners may have. And I wish you the best of luck for your podcast and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.